Talk to us then about the importance of today's prayer.
Thank you very much indeed, Linda. Catholics and many, many people of Christian denominations and indeed people of other faiths have been praying very hard for the Pope over these past few days and couple of weeks, in fact, since he's been in hospital. But it's also, as you say, we're facing uncertainty, and when people are facing uncertainty, it's very good to try to bring people together, because within the Church we are a family. And so we came together this morning as the family of the Catholic Church in Johannesburg to pray particularly for Pope Francis, and that in his suffering the Lord will give him courage and will give him strength. We do realize, of course, that he is 88 years old, going on 89, and that obviously at an age like that to have double pneumonia is indeed a very serious issue. But we know that also he is a very strong person within himself. We are aware that even though he has been in hospital over the past couple of days, he's even done a little bit of work from hospital, and he is receiving Holy Communion and so on. So we are very encouraged by those signs, and we simply feel the need to be in solidarity with him, a spiritual solidarity with him as he faces his illnesses.
And most importantly, when I listened to your prayer this morning, you also reflected on what he stands for, a man of compassion who wants people in the world to be compassionate to others, particularly those who are marginalized. Talk to me about, the importance of bringing this up at this critical moment.
You see, I did mention in my homily as well that the word pope comes from the Latin word pontiff, which means a bridge, I suppose. And a bridge is what the role of the Pope is. He's meant to gather people and not to scatter, to unite and not to divide. Pope Francis has done this in a very special way, according to a very special charism he has, which is one of great humility, of simplicity, of an openness with people. And he's really challenged all of us, I think, to say that, we can get very comfortable in our own milieu, our own surroundings, but we've got to think about those people who are feeling isolated, who are lonely, those people who have had to flee their countries because of violence and so on. And he's saying, get out of yourself, look to the others. And as Pontiff, he's saying, let's bring people in, let people belong, bring in those from the periphery, from the marginalized corners of the earth, and try to bring them in so that they belong to society, to humanity, to community.
His papacy has really been centered around humility, and as a lot of people reflect and pray for him, this is one of the things that they bring up a lot, to say his papacy is filled with humility, but also selflessness. When you look at, for example, the manner in which he chose to lead his papacy, staying in that 2-bedroom apartment and all of that. What does this tell us about the Pope himself as a person?
I think as a person, what it is telling us about is that he feels a great deal of dependence on God. He feels that he is the servant of God, and as a servant of God, he is at the service of humanity. Not only the Catholic Church, but I think he has got a vision that is at the service of the whole of humanity. Therefore, he's tried to get this global solidarity among people. And while he is very humble, and that is certainly true, and a very gentle person, he's also to say what he thinks. And I think that this has been particularly apparent in terms of the way he has dealt with certain wars and crises in the world, where he has really denounced injustices, and is not afraid to do that. He does it very, very strongly. He's challenged nations in terms of migrants and refugees, even though that's been a very unpopular message with certain people in certain countries, and yet he's really challenged that. In terms of our common home, the environment and care for the environment, again, he's been very, very challenging towards people and gone against a very powerful forces in many ways. But he hasn't been afraid to do that. But he's done it gently, and he's done it with a great deal of humility.
Yeah. The last time that he was in Africa, I think it was around January 2023, he made stinging remarks, particularly against the so-called Western powers, saying, hands off Africa. I know some of the speeches went on to be put in a book, right? And it says, again, talking about, what he stands for when it comes to exploitation in Africa. Just talk to us maybe a little about the relationship with the African continent.
I think that's one of the reasons why we feel so close to Pope Francis here in South Africa and in Africa in general, because he comes from the developing world himself, from South America. So he understands us and we can understand him. I think the developed nations, the Western nations particularly, have found it very difficult to understand Pope Francis in many respects, and he has challenged them. He has challenged them about their attitudes towards Africa and to other countries, and he hasn't really been afraid to call a spade a spade. In fact, on the follow-up encyclical on Laudate Si, on the environment, he even went so far as to mention the United States as somehow being an obstacle in the whole process of trying to develop a consciousness to protect the environment. So he hasn't been afraid to go out there and to say these things. And as I say, that he's faced quite a fierce and powerful comeback because of that. But again, he has not stopped because he believes passionately that this is right and this is correct. And he's got the rest of the world with him, I think, in that regard.
And for South Africa, most recently, he in fact sent prayers after the Usindiso building fire, praying for those who lost their loved ones, but also praying for the people that were in that fire, highlighting the kind of people that were there, migrants, and I couldn't help but remember that he too is of migrant parents. So that kind of extension to think of those who may be marginalized in society seemingly standing out.
Linda, the fact of the matter is, who isn't a migrant? We are all migrants in the sense of our past, in our history. I mean, my parents came from Europe, from Scotland and from Ireland, but I'm South African and I regard myself as being South African. I mean, people indigenous to South Africa, as we would say, have come from other parts. You might have a small group who are truly indigenous to South Africa, but it's the same all over the world. The world is a history of migration. So it's extremely unfair at the moment simply to see migrants as being a threat, seeing them as being a nuisance or whatever. It's denying our own past in many ways. But again, referring to the fire and his message to us at that time, again, it just shows his sense of a global solidarity, that we are one human family and that we have got to work together as a human family and to get away from this very great nationalism, a very narrow nationalism that seems to be growing in the world, rather to have a much broader perspective of having to be concerned about every part of our human family.